Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. I am Jesse Firestone. Today is another AMA episode for May, the May, I guess. I just wrapped up doing critical force testing about an hour ago, so I was pretty haggard after that, but I did drink a Red Bull going into it, or half of one, which I'm now finishing. So this might be a little bit more manic than the usual AMA episode. I also usually put these into some kind of order that I think makes sense, but I didn't bother with that this month. So yeah, this should be a little bit spastic. So it should be fun. Here we go. Daniel asks, relating back to your recent post about skill acquisition, what are some of the skills you are working on right now or you worked on recently? Just did like a scattershot brainstorm answer to this. I've really been working on my aggression and my flow state lately. I think that was something I tapped into really well on Kingslayer, which I'll talk about later. And I've also been doing a decent amount of like head pointing and highballing, especially since I did Kingslayer. I kind of just brought the physical difficulty level down quite a bit and did a bunch of these highballs that I've been excited about for a while because I haven't had a chance to do any head pointing for quite a few seasons now. And highballs are really good for working on getting into a flow state on demand, and then both getting back into a flow state if you get distracted, and also kind of doing not a conscious evaluation of how well you're climbing, but a sort of subconscious evaluation, and then knowing like, is this the go where I take it to the top, or do I need to like down climb and drop off, or yeah. Head pointing's been really good for that. So I feel like I'm in a really good place there. I might have like some of the best flow that I've ever had. Kind of funny to talk about highballs and hear a siren in the background. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that. But yeah, that's been going well. I feel like aggression is also something I've been practicing lately, kind of in tandem with that, especially ride or die. I really needed to leave the ground feeling super aggressive, and that worked out well. For the rest of the summer, I think I'm pretty psyched to do some sport climbing, so kind of working on my economy again, and I think the head pointing dovetails pretty well with that. And in my training, I've had a kind of gnarly shoulder injury that's actually been bothering me since last fall. I think I'm just about done with my hamstring injury from last fall. It seems to be doing better. But the shoulder thing has been super annoying, so that's what I'm kind of focused on in my physical training. I think my pulling power is kind of unlocked right now, so I'm going to see how far I can push that with my new combo of training activities. Yeah, those are just a few things that I'm kind of practicing. Another question from Daniel. What are you most excited about this year? Climbing, podcasting, growing the coaching business, etc. Anything. Kind of not trying to grow my coaching business right now, at least not in terms of breadth. I think I want to be a little bit deeper and add some detail and some depth to the coaching relationships that I have, and hopefully scale my business not in a just adding more clients kind of way, but in a being able to deliver better services to all of my clients that I have kind of way. Sort of in my coaching adolescence in that sense. Like I think I have enough business, but I now have so much business that it's draining for me to create as good of a product for coaching as I want to. So that's what I'm most excited about, is figuring out how to deliver a better product to all my clients. So, and as far as climbing stuff, I'm building a board in my garage right now. I have all the stuff out there. I just need to put it together, kind of waiting for that to happen. And then just excited to be feeling better after a kind of rough phase of health stuff. The last like 6 weeks or so, I've been feeling a lot more energy, which is like really nice. Oh yeah, and I think I mentioned it in the podcast already, but I'm retooling my principles course this summer. That's something I haven't started working on, but yeah, later this summer, I will release like an updated version of my technical course, and I'm pretty excited about that because I actually really like the content of the course, and I want to improve the delivery system there and kind of retool a little bit. I may even get to a point where initial coaching clients get run through the course before they come to work with me explicitly, because I feel like that will improve my coaching pretty dramatically if we can like all be using the same terminology and understand the same core concepts and stuff. So I'm kind of excited about that. Like systematizing things a little bit, just to make it easier to do what I do well. Okay, one more question from Daniel. How does your rest time change for different types of boulders? Like finger versus body intensive boulder, short versus long boulder, technical versus tension or power boulder. I think most of these things don't really matter too much except for short versus long. At least for me, when I'm climbing something that is really close to my limit, that's all finger and body intensive. I guess there's nuance there, and some things are harder on the fingers or harder on certain parts of the body. But I think the rest time between, your fingers for maximum finger power versus your shoulder for maximum shoulder power is not crazy different. So the big thing is probably just the length of time. And it seems like buildup of metabolites is one of the most fatiguing and stressful things. So when the boulders start to get long and you start to get really drained on each attempt, you do definitely need more rest in between tries. I think resting more in between tries for a really short boulder probably has more to do with like the mental side of it for me. And also things like, when you're doing a really powerful boulder or like a single move boulder that's really powerful, chances are good that it's also like pretty hard on your skin. So even if you could rest less and try it more, I'll probably still rest more and try to make my tries really valuable and really think things through before I give it another try, just because the number of tries that I have in a day is still limited by my skin probably. A rule of thumb that I heard somewhere, not sure where I heard this, was when you're really limit red pointing, to rest no less than 7 minutes plus 1 minute per move that you did on your last try. So like if you do 5 moves and you fall, you would rest 12 minutes. If you do 10 moves and you fall, you would rest 17 minutes. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb, but I haven't like literally done that or set a timer in a very long time. And these days I find there's so much tactical stuff and logistical stuff that I need to do with most of my projects. Like I want to brush all the holds and clean all the holds and sometimes hit them with the jet fan, and I have to check my skin and sand all my skin, make sure it's all good. I'll usually replace my tape if it's not perfect. All that stuff takes time. Plus I take my shoes off, got to put my shoes back on, get my hands chalked back up, and then I need to breathe for a couple minutes and get in the zone. And like usually by the time I do all that stuff, it's been 15 or 20 minutes, almost regardless of like what boulder it is. And some people may think that that's like really fussy or wasteful or something, but I pull off the ground a very small number of times when I climb outside, and I climb a lot of stuff. So I think it's worth it. Okay, there were a couple questions and messages about Kingslayer. So Jake asks, you recently sent what could be considered solely based on grade your hardest climb. However, from following you on social media this season, the lead up was not all that anticipated, finger injury, health issues, etc. How did you overcome these physical obstacles, and probably just as, if not more important, keep your mental spirits high and mind in a place where you still felt comfortable and psyched to try a near limit project? Keeping morale during a time of high injuries/health issues is something I'm working on and would love to hear your personal anecdote. One other question that I got on here, I got some messages, but the other question that was asked literally was, any takeaways from your experiences and processes on Sling Blade thus far and Kingslayer, or post-send reflections beyond what you've shared on Instagram? So I'll just read my general thing that I put on Instagram here, because I think it covers a lot of the bases, but then I'll talk a little bit more nuanced. So I wrote, my motivation to climb Kingslayer was steadfast by virtue of the problem's perfection. All the hardest problems I've invested myself in have had one section that I dislike for some reason, and this manifests as faltering confidence, constant stopping thoughts, and a feeling of defeated enervation. I had no hang up with Kingslayer. I was excited to climb on it every day. Although I did want to do it, and I did feel pressure to do it, I would have happily come back 50 more times. I feel like that addresses the morale piece a little bit. From my first day, I felt immediately magnetized. Other priorities felt distant. This made the process easy. I found the grade intimidating, but sessions on other limit problems did their job of assuring me that I have business at this level, even if the sends are elusive. More importantly, the experience of climbing Kingslayer took me back to early days of unbridled enthusiasm. Rather than the Pyrrhic victory of attrition that many projects march towards, I felt the joy of a milestone. I remember my first V3 at the gym, my first outdoor climb, my first ascent, my first V10 flash, in much the same way that I think I'll remember Kingslayer. I achieved perfect flow and hit possibly the high watermark for physical effort in my life, an unmatched high. It's so incredibly rare for the line, the climber, and the time to converge in such a manner. a true aligning of the planets. I felt greedy every time I wanted just one more day of good conditions, and now I've spent all the days since wondering if I'll ever have such an alignment again. I love bouldering, but it is a game of self-satisfaction and avarice in the end. And then I have this Henry George quote, which I've been obsessed with since I saw Keith Bradbury's font bouldering movie, The Outsider. Man is the only animal whose desires increase as they are fed, the only animal that is never satisfied. I feel like that quote just sums up so much of what we do to ourselves in climbing. I wrote some stuff on Instagram about the difficulty too, but I don't think I'll read that here. You can go read it on my Instagram if you want to. The short version is I'm not too stressed about how hard it is, but it was really hard for me to do. And I'm not too worried about anything other than the fact that it was just a really good challenge level for me at the time that I did it. And I am really thankful that Jake asked me about it without getting into sort of labeling me based on how hard it is or how hard it's perceived to be. Because more and more these days, I think I really try to get my self-identity as a climber from pursuing things that I find interesting and find challenging and not looking for some label that I can stamp on myself or like put on my resume, if that makes sense. Like I'm not trying to climb V13 because I want to be some kind of climber. I'm just trying to climb specific lines because I want to climb those lines. I do also want to climb really hard as I can if possible. And right now for me, the grade V13 is really interesting. So I get that that's a little bit hypocritical for what I just said. But for me personally, like I will not get to my limits if the reason that I'm trying to get to them is to climb some number. It just has to be a purer motivation than that for me to push myself as hard as I possibly can. So as far as the keeping morale high thing, I think you have to find things that inspire you. It kind of ties together to that same idea. And for me, Kingslayer was easy because I just was inspired and psyched to climb on it every day that I went up there. And I'll shout out my friend who supported me on that boulder too, because it really helped. He had already climbed the boulder, but he was just really, I don't want to say pushy, but he really believed in me and believed I could do it. And he was like, we got to go back up there. You can do it, every week. And so that really helped me stay psyched because I was just kind of coming out of my haze at the time I started climbing on it this spring. And in the bigger picture, as far as just keeping your spirits high when you're going through stuff like that, I know a lot of people reached out to me after I posted about my chronic health issues, which is great. It's good to connect to people when you have that kind of stuff going on. And, some of the people that reached out, I was kind of surprised because I hadn't heard anything, and they hadn't posted anything because there's a stigma. People don't want to talk about feeling bad or talk about their poop. It's not really like super popular topic to bring up on social media. So for me, it's just been so long that I'm just used to it. And I think I've proven to myself again and again that climbing is not about how I feel physically. It's about what I bring to the session. And even if I don't feel good physically and my power output's low or I'm really tired or I don't get very many tries, I can still climb hard stuff. I can still be really proud of my physical performance, even if I don't feel good. I guess I've heard this phrase or this saying, you don't have to feel good to get going, but you do have to get going to feel good. That kind of sums it up for me, I guess if I was going to try to summarize it, I would say you have to take care of yourself and you have to pay attention to your recovery and to your tweaks and twinges. And if you have chronic health stuff, you have to pay attention to that stuff. But you also must absolutely never, ever count yourself out if it's something that matters to you. So as far as Briana's question, it's cool to see like my continued growth as a climber. I'm really glad I didn't try Sling Blade this season because it gave me an opportunity to see that I've grown in these other areas. Like I would have guessed last year that Kingslayer was not something that suited me. And actually my first session on it last year, I was trying to not do the jump beta. And then this year I kind of just, I don't know why, felt stubborn and tried the jump beta and was like, oh yeah, actually I'm good at jumping. I thought of Kingslayer as being very board style, and I'm not a great board climber, but I'm pretty decent at jumping to a decent hold. And it's just interesting that like time and time again, I find out that things are not the way that I thought they were, and that I can use my advantages more actively and thoughtfully than I sort of think I can when I'm just seeing the boulder for the first time. Like my hip flexibility, my ability with small holds, my consistency with sequencing and execution, never stopping my refinement of beta, making very good tactical decisions. It's easy for me to discount those things and focus on like the fact that I'm not as strong as my peers in my pulling power, and just be like, well, I can't climb this problem that looks really powerful because I don't have the same pulling power as them. But actually, the stuff that I do have, like the things I just listed, might even be more important than your pulling power. So I think that was a really cool piece of learning that I got from Kingslayer specifically. And then, yeah, I think another takeaway is just the social thing. I definitely couldn't have done it without my friends and my wife. And I spent a lot of times trying Sling Blade solo last year, which I think was a little draining. And then obviously I stopped trying it because I hurt my hamstring. Final takeaway about Kingslayer is just, I was kind of surprised by how much I disliked the feeling of sharing about it. I really felt compelled to share the story, and then I did. And yeah, there's just something interesting about sharing something that you're really proud of, because I feel a lot of joy about doing it, but I also feel a bit of guilt and shame. Like, did I do it for the right reasons? You know, and is my sequence like actually something that's hard because it came so naturally to me and I felt so strong on it? You know, there's like these other negative emotions that are tied into it too. And when you share it, when you put it out there, it's almost like the joy gets diluted a little bit. Like other people get some of the joy. And then for me, it's kind of felt like the shame and the guilt are almost like magnified a little bit, because I'm like then wondering, not only for myself, like, is this sequence actually cool? But now I'm like, well, do other people think this sequence is cool? And I think that's just part of modern life with social media and sharing stuff. And it's part of my job as a social media presence. Sorry if you can hear the dog snoring. But yeah, I was kind of surprised by that. And I think if I continue to try really hard projects, I need to think sort of deeply about what I'm going to share of that process and how to keep doing my best to show really good integrity and be very like vulnerable and very open about how I feel about the process. Because I think that helps stave off some of those weird feelings a little bit when I'm just like sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons and not doing any like image crafting. Okay, enough about that. Briana's other question: favorite post-send donut shop in Leavenworth? Man, I'm a hater. I generally avoid Leavenworth except maybe on calm weekdays. I take East Leavenworth Road in and out of town as often as possible. I like Argonaut a lot for coffee. They have good biscuits. No donuts there. And I really like Dan's Food Market. They might have donuts. There's like a little bakery in the back of the market. Pretty often find myself going and getting, I don't know, like a Spindrift and a croissant or something from Dan's. Pretty good. I don't even know if Leavy has a donut shop, honestly. I'm a terrible person to ask this question. I did my best. I'll just shout out Gaucho Coffee too. If you're in Leavenworth for a few days and you were looking for good coffee, Gaucho in Kashmir, that's the place to go. I know that's not donuts, but... Okay, onward. Robin asks, I've noticed quite an effect on time of day / circadian rhythm and my ability to focus or be patient or try hard, etc. For me, morning or midday is much better than late afternoon or evening. Curious if you have this in your own climbing and if you try to target training or projecting sessions based on when your body and mind are most snappy. Currently, I'm noticing it might be affecting one of my limit sport climbing projects, which has a dictated conditions window from 4 to 8 p.m. where I'm more mentally tired and typically 2 to 3 kilograms heavier than in the morning. This is a really good question. So the short answer is the classic, like, control the controllables and don't worry about the uncontrollables. Like, if your project if the window to climb on your project from 4 to 8 is from 4 to 8 p.m., like, you just get what you get. You're going to be a little more tired. You're going to weigh a little bit more. That's going to factor into how hard the problem or route is for you. But I think the most important thing is just to acknowledge, like, each project is its own individual thing, and this is one of the things that you're going to deal with that project. So lately, the season's kind of winding down here. I've been going out quite late for me. I personally prefer climbing in the morning, and I prefer training in the morning too. I don't often get the chance to do that stuff because it might not seem like it through the other side of the influencer lens, but actually I do kind of work a pretty 9 to 5 job, maybe a little bit more like a 7 to 5 7 to 7 some days kind of job. But yeah, lately I've been going out pretty late and not climbing in the morning just because of conditions. They tend to be best in Leavenworth in the late evening. So often I've not even been leaving the crag until 8:30 or 9 and getting home at 9:30 or 10. And that can be challenging for sure. But, I just show up, put my best foot forward, and try not to think too much about whether I'm tired or not. You really can't always maximize internal and external condies. What we're looking for is an opportunity to align those things as much as possible, but you get what you get on the day, basically. So as far as the controllables, you have caffeine. That's a really powerful tool. To the extent that it doesn't mess with your sleep, it's probably the most well-researched and predictable performance enhancing drug that most people have access to. And it's definitely worth exploring if you haven't. I also think music is pretty potent. Maybe not as good for sport climbing, but even using music to get into a proper state might be helpful. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think accessing flow is something I'm really, really interested in right now and something I'm practicing a lot. And especially for sport climbing, I think it's super important. So maybe a breathing practice and some kind of mantra, and not trying to get yourself calmed down, but actually trying to get yourself psyched up might be worth exploring. The dog is absolutely napping so hard right now. Yeah, you can't always get maximum performance, unfortunately, but be smart about it and then be stubborn, in that order. Okay, also from Robin, any tips for getting psyched to create a 20 to 40 move spray wall circuit? I've had great results from doing circuits in my training, namely improving power endurance and beta memory, but it is hard for me to get motivated to set a new circuit, and my gym's spray wall gets reset every 6 months or so. Once I have a circuit, tweaking it and doing it is easy and fun, but I find the mental load of creation rough. Also, my gym's spray wall is only open for the public to use in the evening, so I'm also mentally tired after a work day when I'm starting the process. Yeah, seeing a theme here. So I covered some setting tips and tricks in the Nugget Fundamentals spray wall episode. Might be worth going to take a listen to that to get some wisdom there. I would also say circuits are really easy to create kind of a bit at a time. So if they only reset every 6 months, maybe, the first 4 or 5 sessions after they reset it, you can just go in and climb, 5 or 8 moves. You should be able to remember 5 or 8 moves in a day. And then the next week, add 5 or 8 moves to that and continue. And you can adjust it as you go, but you don't have to do 20 or 40 moves in a single session. You can definitely build a problem and then add to it, and tweak it as you go. And also it's okay if it's not perfect. Like, it's nice to have a perfect circuit, but when I'm setting stuff on the board, I talked about this in that other podcast, I almost like if it's a little bit like messed up and imperfect. You can always make the perfect version later, but it's training. You kind of want it to be like awkward and powerful. That's not terrible. I also think for circuits specifically, using open feet or using a really simple rule for feet, like all the orange holds are on for feet or all the black holds are on for feet, that will simplify the setting process considerably. So that's probably a pretty useful tool. And then also cognitive strain, that's a real thing. So if you just are too tired from the workday to focus on a difficult cognitive task like this, just do board triples or do boulder triples. Take somebody else's boulder that they set on the spray wall and do triples on it, or do however many times you need to do it in order to hit your window of capacity. Because that's a lower cognitive strain option. And at the end of the day, we're all having to make opportunity cost decisions over and over to make our training effective. And if your work is really tiring, maybe it's not worth it to set a circuit. Even if a circuit would be 2% better training for you than doing triples, if you can execute on the triples more in the sessions, it might be a better training option for you. Maybe like a good analogy is I've had clients who are really busy and they don't want to rack their weights. And so they just leave the weights on the bench for bench press and like do isometrics, do several sets of like isometrics trying to push the bar until they feel warmed up. And then their first working set is the first time they actually lift the barbell off the J cups. Is that optimal training? No, but it means that their workout is really fast and they don't have to mess around with racking the weights. And that was something that was preventing them from doing bench. So if it gets you to do the stuff that you have to do, then it's good training. That's what matters. Okay, Olga asks, RE, your recent Instagram post, how to make climbing friends. I don't even like people that much. This is funny. I think it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it is a good question because the post that Olga is referring to, I basically said, hey, if you want to climb hard, it actually makes a lot of sense to be nice to people and make friends because people bring you opportunities. They invite you on trips. They ask if you want to go out to a boulder. You'll have more paths, you'll have more beta, you'll have more fun. And I got some funny comments on that post. But the point of the post was you can be selfish or you can be altruistic. It really doesn't matter. You're still going to be a better climber if you have more people in your life. So it doesn't really matter if you're doing it for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. If your goal is to climb harder, you still got to do it. A long time ago, I read this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's kind of a classic self-help book. And you can like that type of book or not. I think it's still worth reading, even if you think it's bullshit. But the tip that really stuck with me in that book, which is kind of interesting, was to just become interested in other people. And it's such a funny and like almost self-referential tip because basically the tip is pay attention to other people, turn people into a person, and then they're easier to like. When you say you don't even like people that much, like I know Olga, so I think Olga likes me. I'm pretty sure we're friends. And I think that's because I'm not people, I'm Jesse. So if you want to make climbing friends, you have to just meet people and talk to them and become friends with them and get to know them. And then suddenly they're not random people anymore. They're your friend. And I think that starts with just, an earnest interest in that person. I think this is kind of how I got into coaching is I just really like this. You can kind of like, you can talk to somebody and be like, what are you working on? Or like, what's your favorite problem you did this season or whatever. And you can just hear their answer and move right on to how you feel about that problem or the holds or whatever. Or you can ask them why they like that or why they're trying that problem or what they're struggling with on that problem. You can be interested in it or not. And those are two very different ways of interacting with another person. And if I had to condense this advice to one tip, I would just say, ask more questions. Next question from Olga. That's ironic. How to train Gastons, specifically long lateral moves on Gaston holds. Yeah, long lateral moves. Those are hard. Obviously, overt shoulder training in the weight room is going to be helpful because shoulders are, in climbing relatively prone to injury under a lot of stress. And also the reason that we strength train in general is to increase the capacity of our soft tissues so that we can do more practice and better practice. So the weight room is really helpful for shoulders. Obviously, pulling and pressing, I really think some kind of overhead press is great for shouldery, Gaston-y kind of moves. I think isolated internal and external rotation, either with a dumbbell or cable machine, is really helpful for working on Gastons, especially some kind of isolated ER. There's a couple good dumbbell variations on the internet if you do some Googling, but personally, I think doing it on a cable stack is probably the best that it's going to get because then you can have the shoulder up and out to the side in abduction so that your upper arm is parallel to the ground, and then do external rotation with the cable stack with the pulley like all the way at the bottom of the tower. Because then you get a really nice force profile compared to what you'll get with a dumbbell. You can kind of set up the same force profile with a dumbbell, but you have to be like laying down on a bench and it's awkward. I also am a big fan of lateral raises with a dumbbell. I think those are super accessible if you don't have a cable machine. Front raises with a dumbbell, also good. A lot of climbers have front of shoulder pain. Front raise, full can front raise especially. Quote, full can, that means like thumb up. That might be more accessible than a lateral raise if you have shoulder pain. And then probably my favorite would just be low gear style or wall crawl style climbing in shouldery positions. So choosing holds that face towards each other for the handholds, and then big footholds, stable positions with the feet. And then just doing time under tension climbing in that style up the board. I had a lot of success with that over, I think that was last spring that I was doing that. And I learned a lot about shoulder climbing. I don't know that I got like physically that much stronger, but I feel like I brought my skill level with that kind of climbing a little bit closer to my physical capacity, which is really what we're looking for most of the time. Hopefully that gives you some ideas. I can send people a low gear shoulder variation video. There's one on my Instagram if you scroll back far enough, but maybe I'll reshare that post when I post this AMA on Instagram. Okay, last question from Olga. One move climbs, love or hate, meaning when the whole climb and grade and difficulty revolves around one extremely hard move. So your sessions are basically just falling off this one move over and over again. Yeah, so one mover climbs, but at your projecting level, it sounds like. Love or hate? Love or hate? I love all rock climbing. It really depends on what the type of move is. Like if it's a one move climb and it's like really tweaky and fingery or super skin intensive or something, yeah, it's not going to be very fun. But I think for projecting, one movers are kind of sick because you just have to keep showing up and believing, and then you do it, and maybe you only ever do the move one time, and it's like one of the hardest things you ever do. That's pretty cool. Is the process of trying it over and over again fun? Maybe not for most people, but if you are engaged in the process and not just trying to do the boulder and move on, then I don't know, it's just another move. I think it's interesting. That probably has more to do with like motivation and process versus outcome than it does with the type of boulder. In general, if you're trying to limit break, I think amortizing the difficulty of the climb over more moves is going to make it easier to project. So like a lot of people do the practitioner as their first 11. And I mean, partly that's just a really cool climb, but also it doesn't really have a move on it that's harder than like V8. So if you can do V8 moves, you can probably do all the moves on the practitioner. It just then becomes a question of like power endurance and session capacity to like try the moves enough. And that's cool. It's like much more accessible than like a single move V11 where you just have no idea how close you are. But if someone climbed V8 and they found a single move V11 that they were really inspired by and they could get invested in it, I see no reason why they couldn't project it until they do it. It's just really a question of inspiration and motivation at that point. So yeah, I'm for them. I like one moves. All right, Sam asks, or rather Sam says, I originally didn't come here with a question in mind, just some appreciation. A lot of people really value what you contribute to the climbing community and climbing media through your posts and now the podcast. Your unique perspective is fresh, thoughtful, and it's clear that you care, which I'd argue that you care more than most. Please keep innovating. It's greatly needed. Here's the question that came to mind when typing the above. Have you thought about filming your podcast episodes for YouTube in addition to the high quality audio as you continue to grow? Thanks again, bro. Man, thanks for the nice words, Sam. I really appreciate that. I am doing my best, and I really do care. YouTube. Technically, I do film all of the podcast episodes, and I am even filming the AMA episode that I'm doing right now, just in a podcasting app. More of those will be getting turned into content as we go, but yeah, maybe I'll consider eventually putting the full length on YouTube. I am looking into how to at least put the audio on YouTube so that YouTube podcasts will pick up the Inner Fire Climbing podcast. So look for that in the next couple weeks or something as I figure out how to do that. Otherwise, TBD. But if you don't know, I do have some video logs on YouTube. And those are fun because they're a little bit more like out in the woods, you know, where the climbing actually happens. And a little bit more, I don't know, expository than this. This is kind of clinical stuff for the most part. So if you haven't checked out the video logs, maybe give them a try. Haven't made one in a while, but I think I'm going to make one in the next few days about my experience on synesthesia and some other highballs that I did this season, just because it might be fun to kind of talk about that a little bit in situ, as they say. A couple more questions. Jishnu asks, some skill drills have hard external constraints imposed by the nature of the drill, such as skipping holds for dynamism or eliminating a limb while climbing. Others are more internal and depend on applying intention and focus, like the digging feet drill. Others are somewhere on the spectrum between these two, like the confident feet drill. He's referring to drills that I use in my coaching. For the intentional kind of drill, do you have any advice for keeping focus? I often find myself focused on the first move or two, but then getting distracted by the time I reach the top. And second, measuring success or evaluating feedback on a given climb. With external drills, getting to the top provides imperfect evidence of getting to the top, or you can show a video to a coach. But for internal drills, this kind of evaluation feels fuzzy. Getting to the top provides imperfect evidence of getting to the top. Very philosophical. So basically, the question here is kind of a general question about how to train skills or how to be more effective at skill training in general. So yeah, adding intent to something that you're working on, I think is a really useful way to practice something specific in your climbing. But we kind of know for the most part in skill development now that environmental learning or in situ learning is like more effective for encoding skills. So as an example, like practicing dribbling around cones is maybe useful to just understand how to move your feet and how to move the ball for soccer. But then if you try to dribble around other players as if they're cones, that practice doesn't really show up for you the way that you want it to. You have to actually dribble around other players in order to get good at it. It's almost like a refutation of the Karate Kid style where he like takes his jacket off 1,000 times and then when he fights somebody he can like kick their ass because he took his jacket off a bunch of times. It doesn't really work that way. So as far as keeping focus when we are trying to do I would call this linear skill practice. When we are trying to do like a linear skill practice with some kind of intent, some kind of what Jish is calling internal focus, the focus is sort of the meta skill. And if you can't get yourself to focus on something that you're doing, then it doesn't really matter that much what the intent is or how good of a job you do, right? Because that is the whole point of linear skill practice is we are working on focusing on one specific thing. It makes sense to me that that's a good hypothesis for why environmental skill learning is more effective than linear skill learning, because environmental learning doesn't really demand that you pay attention to anything in specific. It just demands that you try to achieve the task and let your body organize, which has value. So my advice for keeping focus is probably to reduce the number of distractions or reduce the difficulty until you can focus on that thing. I'm not sure exactly what is distracting in this environment, but yeah, maybe headphones and music, maybe easier climbing. Maybe if the bouldering area is like busy or there's a lot of kids, you could go practice on the auto belay, things like that. Like something I hear all the time is that I give people like a finger training drill to do on a board. And they're like, well, there were people climbing on the board, so I couldn't do it. Which makes sense in the sense that you don't want to inconvenience those other people. But personally, I think if other people get to hammer the problems and grease things up and yell and stuff, I have just as much of a right to spend 45 seconds crawling up the board. And focusing in that environment, to me, seems like good practice, at least as good of practice as the actual climbing is for my fingers. So maybe the focus is the thing to practice on, rather than whatever the actual thing you're trying to focus on is. As far as measuring success or evaluating feedback on a given climb, yeah, obviously video review is really useful, but I think, again, this is maybe a downside of the linear skill practice is there's not really like it's not very binary. There's not really like a success criteria. It's more just like, how do you feel like it went? There are things we can work on. So like when you're practicing smearing, you can pay attention to how much you're staying dorsiflexed while you extend and reach off of the foothold. And if you watch the video and you're like plantar flexing on the smear, then you're not achieving that part of the drill that you're trying to achieve, right? So there can be signs, but it's going to be really specific to each drill. And I think the easiest way to measure success or to get feedback is to switch out of the linear style of skill practice back to the environmental style of skill practice. And that would be like taking something that you've been working on in a linear way and then finding a goal that challenges it in an environmental way so that you can then see if you've gotten better. Like I talk about this all the time, but progress is something that is revealed. It's not something that happens in front of your eyes. You just are going to climb something Sunday and be like, oh, I got better at crimping. Like, it's not happening while you're training your fingers. You know, you may notice it a little bit, but it's when you go out and you actually try some hard boulder that you're like, oh, my fingers have actually gotten a little bit stronger, right? And same thing with your footwork or your breathing or whatever it is. You'll just notice evidence that these things have improved, but it's almost always retrospective, in my opinion. And I even often notice it in my clients. They'll be like, wow, you've gotten so much better at, you know, compression or like heel hooks or whatever. And they'll be like, have I though? And I'll be like, okay, well, we'll go back and we'll watch a video of you doing this from a year ago and we'll see what it looks like in comparison. And then they're like, oh, wow, yeah, it is a lot different than it used to be. So sometimes you need the historical data to really contextualize your results. I know that was a little scattershot. Hopefully it made sense. Next question from Jish. A lot of sports science climbing people seem down on things like the TRX or rings. Do you see any particular use cases for them for climbing, besides the fact that someone may just enjoy them? Some coaches kind of frown on these types of training tools, and I'll confess I don't program them super often. I program calisthenics type stuff, TRX or rings. The most common reason that I'll program it is because it's like what somebody has or it's what they want to do. Not because I think that they're not effective. I think they can be super effective. But just because I think from a time point of view and from what we're trying to get out of our physical training point of view, I just tend to think that weights, barbells and dumbbells and machines are more efficient, and that most of the stability and coordination stuff that we need, we can get from climbing. So like, I think if you took two theoretical climbers who are at the exact same level, like if you could just, you know, quantum split the timeline and have the same climber do different types of training and then somehow merge the timeline to like look at the two climbers. If you took person A and you had them do the windshield wipers on a bar where they like pull up on the bar and do a half lever and like kip their legs back and forth from left to right, and you had person B climb steep boulder problems, occasionally cutting their feet and then swinging their feet back into the footholds, I would bet, I don't know, I'd bet a month of coaching that person B is going to, quote, get more out of that than person A. Obviously, we'll never be able to run that experiment. And in a long enough timeline, if somebody's climbing for 10 or 15 or 20 years, it's very likely that they're going to do some of both and they're going to get some merit out of both. So it doesn't really have to be one or the other. But if somebody's like a parent or they're just a busy person, I'm going to go for the free weights and have people practice those skills on the wall pretty much every time. Just my personal take. Have become a really big fan of plyo. That's like neither here nor there, but plyo is something that I put in almost every training plan now. And I kind of am leaning towards having like one calisthenics or one, you know, ring skill, kind of more balance or more coordination type skill in strength training for most people. Not for the recruitment benefits or for any of the other physical benefits, but just because I think having some skill practice in the strength training session is like interesting to people. And for myself, I have found that like calisthenics type skills, you sort of see progress in a different way than you do with weight training. Like with weight training, especially like once you're kind of like, I'm not going to be adding weight to my bench press, you know, every week or whatever, right? So progress is like relatively slow once you've kind of plateaued a little bit. But with the calisthenics thing, because so much of it is just practice, you do get these kind of quick gains. So if I'm writing an 8 or 12 week plan for somebody, it's kind of nice to have something like that in there, because even if they don't make big progress in like their bench and deadlift or whatever, and just be like, damn, look how clean those look, you know, which is kind of cool. So there's some thinking on that. All right. That is all the questions for the month. That is the end of the May AMA. Next month will be June. I'll probably post the AMA questions sometime in mid-June. And just as a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast, you can become a supporter on Patreon. Patreon supporters get to ask these questions. So if you want to hear me give you my answer, then you can become a supporter and ask those questions there. Also get lots of other goodies. The principles course that I mentioned is 10% off if you're a patron. And just a reminder that if you buy that course now, you will still have access to it when I upgrade it later this year, and the price will be going up later this year. So if you're interested in that technical course, then you might want to get in on that before it gets more expensive. And yeah, patrons also get some other goodies. I think I'm going to go back to doing the video breakdowns. There wasn't like a huge outcry of people wanting me to do them, but a couple people mentioned that they liked them. I just wasn't getting feedback on them. So if you do want to see those or don't want to see those as part of Patreon, please let me know, because that does dictate kind of what direction I go. And also just an update on the merch. Currently looking at samples, so I'm guessing that I'll be shipping orders for that, or taking orders for it in maybe mid to late June, something like that. And I'll probably announce it to the wider world in the next couple weeks. Hope everybody's climbing and training is going well. It's getting hot now, so I know people are kind of moving inside. Hope you're all feeling good. Hope you all sent your projects. And I will talk to you soon here on the podcast. Bye.